Welcome to Creative Tien channel. Today we want to knit women's gloves on LK150, and I'm using worsted weight yarn, so it's easily available and it will go very quickly. And I'm going to start with a mark ribbon, so we will have every other needle. I start with the left 17 until the right 16. And every other needle I put it into non-working position so it doesn't knit. The tension I have it set on number 5, and depending on the yarn, some yarns are thicker, you can make it 5.5 if it gets too tight. And the upper tension is number 5 too. So I will start with simple E-wrap. Just E-wrap on the needle we selected, so it's every other needle. And I will just knit 2 rows and hang some weight. And make sure the end needle is knitted properly. Sometimes the first row or the first 2 rows, the edge needle doesn't knit properly and you have to do it manually. After the first 2 rows, I can start hanging some weight. This comb should be enough for now. And we'll start doing the ribbon. Depending on your own preference, you can make it longer or shorter. I will need 30 rows for the ribbon. After you need 30 rows, we can start hanging back to the needle to make a hand, and it looks like a ribbon. That's the mark ribbon. I will start picking up the stitch starting from the one on the right edge. That's the knit stitch. And I will place it on the first empty needle. So move the needle down and place it on the empty needle. And the second stitch is the top of this V-shape knit stitch. I'll pick up the first V and then place it on the empty needle. And the third one, that's the top of the knit stitch, and place it on the next empty needle. And we just keep going. Next V, or the upside down V, and then place it on the empty needle. Now all stitches are hemmed back to the needle. I can pull out all the needle to the number 4 holding position, so it's easier to knit. And I will increase the tension about 1 number up for this row, so I change that to 6 just for this row. Or you can also hand knit this row. Now I change tension to 6 and knit 1 row. Now you can see the ribbon is done. Next I'm going to knit the plain knitting for 10 rows. I place my tension back to number 5 and start to knit 10 rows of plain knitting. And it's a good idea to add some weight because the ribbon is kind of bulky. We don't want it to jump off the needle. After 10 rows of plain knitting, we can start to increase on both sides, the left and right. We'll use a 3-prong transferring tool and move 1 stitch out from each side. So just place the tool into the hook, pull it out, and push in, and transfer 1 stitch over, and push the needle out a little bit so it's easier to transfer. Place it in the hook and transfer the first 3 stitches. So that's 1 stitch to the right. And we will do the same for the next 3 stitches and the next 3 stitches. So the total will be 9 stitches transferred. And then 1 more time. The 3 stitch. Transfer to the outer edge. And now we have an empty needle here. We are going to pick up the stitch from the next stitch. This is an empty needle, and we are going to pick up the pearl bump on this stitch. It's next to the empty needle, and just pick it up and place it on the ledge. It's easier to open up the ledge. And we'll do the same on the other side. Transfer 3 stitch out, 1 stitch extra, that's 1 stitch increased, and then the next 3 stitch, and the next 3 stitches. And for the empty stitch, you just pick up the pearl bump from the next stitch here. Pick it up and place it back to the needle, to the empty needle. Okay, now we finished the first increase. We can knit 2 rows. And it might be easier to pull out all the needles, just to prevent dropping stitches. So we need 2 rows. The carriage is set for plain knitting. We didn't change any setting. Now we will repeat the same increasing process about 6 times. So we'll do the same. Transfer the last 3 stitch, 1 stitch out, and another 3 stitch, 1 stitch over, another 3 stitch. So it's 9 stitch transferred, and then we pick up a stitch to hang on the empty needle. This one didn't knit properly. That's it. And the same on the right side. After increasing 6 times on both sides, you can see the V shapes coming. That's for the shaping of the thumb. And now we are going to take off the thumb stitches, the ones we just increased on the waist yarn. And the easiest way is to thread a piece of contrasting yarn and then take it off machine. And since we have 6 increase, so it will be the 6 stitches from the edge. And I will just thread it through. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the thumb stitches we can pick up and do the ribbing. And I push all the needles back to the non-working position. And we'll do the same on the other side. And remember to put a clip or something heavy so it doesn't get tangled when we knit the center part. So we pull out the last 6 stitches and start to thread the yarn and take these stitches off the machine. Now I have the working yarn here from the edge, but I want to continue knitting from here. So I will leave a long yarn tail to sew up the side seam, and then I will cut it and start over from here. And I add a pin here. And now we can continue the middle part. I'm going to knit another 10 rows, and then we will do mark ribbing again. So the same plain knitting, the same tension, and we will knit 10 rows. After the 10 rows, I'm going to transfer the stitch on every other needle. So we start with the second needle from the outer side, transfer to the outermost needle. And remember to put the empty needle back to the non-working position. And we just keep doing that. So it's back to the every other needle after we are done, just like when we starting the project. So that's what it looks like after you're done. And the empty needle go back to the non-working position, and we can start knitting for the mark ribbon. It's up to you how many rows you want. I'm going to knit for 20 rows. Okay, after 20 rows, I will leave a yarn tail and the cut yarn, change it to a contrasting color, and then knit a few rows and take it off. So this is what it looks like after you take it off the machine. You can see the shaping of the thumb increase, and that's the mark ribbon, the back side. So we need to fold this over and sew it by hand to close this mark ribbon, and then fold in half. That's the fingerless mitten. We will seam it up from here, the ribbon, these two together, and then the outer part up to the thumb hole. And we can do the same to close up the top. We can seam up these two pieces first. You can do the matrix stitch or any type of stitch. And then we'll seam the outer part. It will be like that, up to the thumb hole. For the top of the mark ribbon, we can fold it to the back side and then sew it. Here is a stitch we should pick up, these red stitches, and make sure you pick up the first one. It's usually hidden. And then the bottom of the mark ribbon, that's the stockinette stitch on this side, and this is the mark ribbon. You will see the holes. So you can just pick up the holes. Here is the first hole. And then back to the second stitch on this side. It's the second stitch. Find the next hole. And just keep sewing it. And make sure it's not too tight or too loose. You can see this loop is a little bit bigger on this row. So that's the last row of the mark ribbon. After you sew up this row, make sure it's stretchy enough. And then we can continue sewing up the side seams. We'll do this inner part first, and then close the outside and continue going down. Here I sew up the top part already. I use a big fur seam that's flat. I use that seam for my sock knitting part 2 for women's socks, so it's more flat. But of course you can use matrix stitch or any type of the seam. And then I started a little bit here, and I'm going to continue finish the seam from here to the thumb hole. So for the flat seam, it's actually pretty easy. On the outermost edge, there's a line, and there's a knot, a line, that's part of the V, and then a knot, that's just a smaller V. And I usually go through the V hole and then go down the knot because it's easier this way. And then we'll do the same on the other side. Find out the outermost edge, the next line, that's the V shape. And then the next knot, I'm going down from there. And then go back to this side. See the leg. Coming up. And then go down on that small knot. It's a small V. So that's what it looks like after I seam up the sides here and here. The only thing left is the thumb. We will pick up the stitch. Remember to pick up the red color, the main color, instead of the contrasting color. I will start from here, go all the way around. So this is the first one. And I don't worry about the right position of the leg for the V. I can change that later after I pick up the stitches. So I should have 12 stitches on the needle because we increase 6 stitches on each side. After you pick up the 12 stitches, you can take off the waste yarn. And then you can start knitting one by one ribbon for a few rows and then bind off with any type of stretchy bind off. And if it's too tight for your thumb, you can add 1 or 2 more stitches, especially around this area, just to avoid any holes. You can always pick up 1 or 2 extra and then knit 2 together to close any holes. So I pick up 2 more stitches. And I will attach the yarn and then start knitting the one by one ribbon or any type of ribbon you like. In the first row, if you see the V is not hanging correctly, the right side of the V is not in the front, you can switch. I started a few rows and I think I will have about 6 rows of the ribbon to make it look nice. And you can adjust the number of the rows according to the size of your hand or the person's hand you are knitting for. When it's long enough, you can bind off with any type of stretchy bind off. I'm just going to use the sewn bind off. I leave a long tail and use my needle to thread through 2 stitch ahead and 1 stitch back, 2 stitch ahead and 1 stitch back. I'll thread it 2 stitches going up, 1 stitch going down. And then take the stitch off the needle, 2 stitches forward, and then 1 stitch back. And take it off the needle. And we'll just continue that until the end and weave in all the yarn ends and then we're done.